It's time to ignite your soul and unlock your full potential. Join us on Beneath the Helmet, the podcast exploring firefighters' health and wellness. Hosted by retired Fire Chief Arjuna George, our podcast is the perfect place to start your journey towards becoming the best version of yourself. So come on, let's join the conversation and find out what sets your soul on fire.
All right, welcome back, everyone. This is episode number 17, Beneath the Helmet. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, I'm joined with a fellow Canadian firefighter who just recently retired after 30 years of service. He's committed to sharing his story, his knowledge, his experience to make us all a little bit more mentally fit. Today, I'm joined with my brother, Rob Leathan. Rob shares some very powerful messages along with his mental health challenges, including a very powerful story about the day that he almost left us. Rob shares many experiences and the therapies that he used through his recovery. Two highlights were the ketamine therapy as well as equine therapy. He shares a real passion for digital art and creates images and pieces as a way to help educate the world. So please enjoy this episode with Rob 3.0. And as he says, you got to move forward. Rob is definitely a primary example of what resilience looks like. This is a great conversation with my friend and fellow peer supporter, Rob Leathan. Until next time, stay well. All right, we got Rob Leathan here. How's it going, Rob? Good to see you, and welcome to the show.
Thanks for welcoming me to the show.
Awesome. I'd love to hear, and I think our listeners would love to hear a bit about who Rob is and what's your story and where do you come from and what has brought you to where you are today.
Sure. In one day, I'll be a retired firefighter.
That is awesome. Congratulations.
Major benchmark in my life.
How many years?
30.
30. Wow. Congrats.
30 in a couple months.
Yes.
Who I am, like I said, I'm a first responder, firefighter. I also battle PTSD, depression, or PTSD and depression. I'm also a peer supporter, mental health educator and advocate, digital artist. What else do I do? That's what's my sort of new purpose in life. Yeah, I started, I'll give you a little bit of history of my career. I started out my first 2.5 years in fire dispatch. And at that time, it was a one-person show. And the reason why I bring that up is because one of my problematic calls happened that 28 years ago. I worked my way up through the ranks, got out on the floor, worked my way up through the ranks, became an acting captain, eventually became a captain. Then I became an acting platoon chief. In June of 2019, I was scheduled to be promoted to platoon chief, but unfortunately, I was off work at the time. So I never really got that promotion. We were sort of in limbo. 2018, my deputy chief sent a memo out that really irked me. And it was a simple memo, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Like it was just spinning around in my head. And at the same time, I was experiencing marriage issues, which I always thought, well, a lot of first responders have marriage issues. Didn't really think much of it. But from February of 2019, I just can't let go of that memo from the deputy. And I couldn't understand why. And at that point, I said to my wife, I think I need help. And I actually started therapy, weekly therapy in February, like the beginning of February. And like most first responders with big egos, it was, no problem. I can go to therapy and stay at work. That didn't last. That lasted until April 8th, when at that point I realized I can't stay at work. I can't stay in the same environment that got me sick and expect to heal. So I went off work. April 2019 was my last day of work. Did all the assessments. My therapist, who is an amazing woman, I tell everybody, next to my wife and my daughter, she's the third most important woman in my life. I mean it when I say she saved my life and helped me get my life back. So off work in April, still in the very, very early stages of my own recovery. And if you look at the triphasic model, there's the first phase is establishing safety, right? And then the next stage of therapy is processing the problematic calls and memories. And then the third stage is like the reintegration stage of whether that involves returning back to work or just about reintegrating you back into a normal life.
Society or work. Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So so I was still in the very first phase. June 7th, or I will say that once I started therapy and my therapist can't diagnose, right? Because she's a psychotherapist.
Right.
So she couldn't diagnose, but he's got almost 30 years of experience. So the analogy I give is she basically said to me, what if it waddles like a duck, quacks like a duck, flies like a duck, swims like a duck? It's probably not a dog, right? So it's like,
Yes.
yeah, she knew.
Right.
She absolutely knew. So I'm going through therapy and I was initially submitting claims to work through my benefits. And she basically said to me, made it clear that, you know what? It's not cheap for therapy. And it's not going to be it's going to be a long, long haul. So she said, you're going to run out of your benefits. And she really encouraged me to submit a claim to WSIB, which is our provincial workplace safety and insurance board. It's equivalent to, was it BC Safe Work or
Work Safe BC?
Yep. And it's equivalent to WCB boards and all that. I submitted a claim and it was approved under the presumptive legislation that we have here in Ontario. And I did the assessments, and while I was waiting for the results, I'm still in really rough shape emotionally, cognitively, still struggling. I had no idea what my symptoms, like what my triggers were. I didn't have an understanding of my symptoms. And it really was, I guess, a stalled moment in my journey. Sunday, June 2nd, 2019. I call that my rebirth day. Like any other typical day, my wife and I got into an absolutely incredibly heated argument, which of course I started. And instead of acting out on my rage, I was like, no, I'm going to go for a drive. And which ultimately was a good thing to do in that moment, but it's an avoidance strategy and it only reinforces the isolation part of PTSD. So I went for a 5-hour drive and I ended up going to some places that were like near and dear to my heart, like outside. So there was and I haven't told too many people this. There's only a handful of select people, but I might as well be totally honest.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
There's a place near me, forget what it's called. It's a giant pond surrounded by forest area and trails. So, hey, what better place to go? Right beside it is a pet cemetery. Okay, I'm going to go check out the pet cemetery. You have to remember when you're struggling with PTSD and depression and anxiety in the very early days, the brain chemistry is messed up. You're not really thinking rationally. You know, that prefrontal cortex really has no real control. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go check out the pet cemetery before I go for my walk around the pond. And I sat there and nice and quiet. And this pet cemetery had massive headstones and monuments to the pets. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, the people who own those pets, they must have really loved their pets to memorialize them with so many like massive headstones and monuments and I thought, wow, those animals, whether they were old or whatever, they're not suffering anymore here. Look. And then it's a really nice sunny day and it's okay, I'm going to sit in the grass. I'm sitting on the grass and I'm thinking about the love the people had and the fact the animals aren't suffering anymore. And I realized, yeah, you know what? It's really calm here, very calm and peaceful. And in my messed up thinking, it was, so there's love for things. There's no longer suffering in death, very peaceful and calm. I want that peace and calm. And that's when I made up my mind that suicide was a way to get that calm. So I drove home. While I was driving home, I figured out what my plan was going to be, and it was going to be to overdose. So I got home, went through the medicine cabinet, looked at all the pills that we had that, unfortunately, there wasn't enough to accomplish what I wanted to do. So I was like, damn, now what? And it's later in the day. I end up, as you can imagine, it is incredibly emotionally and physically tiring battling PTSD. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go to bed. So figure out what plan B would be the next day. So I did a lot of thinking about a friend and coworker, a fellow firefighter named Mike Scott. He was on my crew for a little bit. He was on my platoon. He died by suicide back in 2018. And I remember going to his funeral. And it was a typical firefighter funeral. Grills up, flag, lots of people attended. Everybody knew what had happened. Nobody wanted to talk about it at all. It was really like, you know how they talk about fog being so thick you could cut it? There was something like that there, and it was so thick you could feel it. And I realized what it was. It was stigma. And I remember looking up at the front of where the service was held, and there's Mike's wife, and there's Mike's 7-year-old son. And I thought, wow, they are going to have to live with that stigma that you can feel for the rest of their lives.
Yep.
And I thought about that a lot. And that's what made me realize that, you know what? I don't want my wife and my son and daughter to live with that for the rest of their lives. And that's what turned me around. I tell people all the time that in Mike's death, he saved my life.
Wow.
And I will say that his mother is almost like an adopted mother for me.
That's a powerful story.
So what I like to point out to people about that is not all suicides are planned out. Not all suicides have signs. Sometimes suicide is an impulsive decision. Mine was. And for me, it was a way of escaping the pain. Right. So I'm feeling hopeless, helpless, had no idea what my triggers were, had no coping strategies at all, with a messed up brain chemistry. I needed to escape the pain. And that's what it was all about. The analogy I give to people when I'm talking about it is, I think we all remember 9/11, and there was one picture that was going around a lot of, they called it the falling man, but a gentleman who had jumped to his death. And that really helps illustrate suicide. Right? He didn't choose to die by suicide. He chose to jump to avoid the pain of burning to death. So it's not like he wanted to die.
Option A, option B.
Yep. Yeah. And when you're in that early stages of your recovery, or of your journey, I should say, that you don't really see options. In my case, option A.
Yeah. So this funeral was the turning point for you? Is that what I heard?
I'm not going to say it was the turning point, but it really helped me realize that, yeah, we're chipping away at stigma around mental health, but there's the stigma around suicide is still 10 times worse.
Yes.
That got me thinking a little bit about not wanting my kids and my wife to live with that. Now, here's the thing about stigma. That was Sunday, June 2nd, 2019. I didn't tell my wife, and I didn't tell my therapist until like October of 2019. And the reason why is because of stigma.
Right.
But I'll be honest, the minute I told my wife and my therapist, that's when my healing really started.
Beautiful.
because there was nothing left to really hide. Yeah, I started therapy. Forced myself to stay open-minded, be willing to try everything possible and keep what works and get rid of what didn't. So I've done, you name the type of therapy, I've pretty much done it. Cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive processing therapy, prolonged exposure therapy, acceptance commitment therapy, EMDR, equine therapy. So done a lot,
Okay.
kept what worked and got rid of what
Yep.
didn't.
What do you feel worked the best for you for your recovery? Was it a mixture of things, or was there one
Yes.
in particular that really stood out?
For me, there's three things. First of all, let me tell you about some of the things that didn't work. One of the things that a lot of therapists really encourage is things like journaling, right? I tried that, didn't work for me. And the reason why it didn't work for me is every time I would journal something, it looked more like a fire report.
Mm.
It was more, here's what I did, blah, 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 in third person. And this isn't really helping me. It only added to the frustration.
Yeah, good
I
point.
got adult coloring books. Coloring, they help take up time in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep. But part of my diagnosis was also OCD tendencies. Just not enough to be clinically diagnosed. So every time I would color outside the lines, oh, it drove me nuts.
Right.
My therapist actually gave me to actually purposely color outside the lines and then write down that inner dialogue. Right. I did all that. And the next therapy session, she started reading that to me and was, oh, holy crap. Nobody should have that said to them. And that's what I was saying to myself. So, yeah, things like that didn't really work for me. But what really made a difference for me is EMDR. I hate it, but it works for me at least. Equine therapy and being open minded, willing to try everything, ketamine therapy. So, what I did with the ketamine therapy is through all of my therapy, I got to a place last year. So, in 2022, around October, where I thought to myself, okay, if this is the best it's going to ever get for me, I can get through life. Right? Like, I can live with it. It may not be a rich and fulfilling life, but you know what? I've got the tools, the coping strategies, don't have suicidal ideation. It's okay. If this is my life going forward, I can handle it.
Accept
But
it. Accept it.
yeah,
You can accept that. Yeah. Yeah.
but I knew there was a little bit more that I could do. Like I knew there was a little bit more progress that I could make, but I was just stuck. And after trying everything, it's, you know what, did some research, talked to a few of my friends in my network down in the US who have done ketamine. I talked to a couple of people up here, and it was, okay, I'm going to try it. And after 6 weeks of ketamine therapy, that's what really finished off my recovery journey and really helped give me my life back. So that
Wow.
was the ketamine. Equine therapy. Oh, it's amazing what you can learn about yourself from horses. They are so in tune with what's going on with you that they know and you don't. And at the place I go, donkeys as well.
Oh,
Okay?
really? Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
donkeys are actually apparently much more intelligent than horses.
Wow. I didn't know.
So I learned as much from the donkeys as I did from horses. Oh yeah, equine therapy was one of my major therapies that helped. And the other one is, like I said, EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It is hard, absolutely hard. But for me, it worked. Just to give you an example, my very first problematic call happened in like I said, 28 years ago when I was in dispatch. I took a 911. So I'm not going to go into too much talk details, but
Yep.
I took a 911 phone call for what turned out to be a fatal apartment fire from the person inside. So I'm not going to go into what
Hmm.
I heard, what was said, or anything like that. but I can tell you there are just some things you can never unhear. But that call, I couldn't even talk about it. I couldn't even really think about it without turning into a big pile of gooey tears on the floor. And after EMDR, I can talk about it now. I can sit here and I can bring up the memories of everything I heard as if they just happened, but there is absolutely zero distress.
Wow, incredible.
Yeah, the EMDR worked well for me.
Hmm. Do you mind expanding on the ketamine? Because I think that's a fairly new treatment. What
Sure.
was your experience like? What was it like to have that treatment done to you?
Incredible. And the old saying, if it seems too good to be true, there's probably something. For me at least, ketamine really helped. And it was fairly quick. Like I said, October of 2022, most of my symptoms were pretty well controlled. I hadn't had flashbacks in a long time. And if a intrusive memory did come up, I was in a good place where I could deal with it. But some of I guess the problematic symptoms that really stayed around was the startle response and my hypervigilance. We were actually working on the hypervigilance with my occupational therapist as well. So that really stuck around with me. The clinic that I went to, they do it with sublingual tablets. They don't do it through IV. So I'm a little bit nervous the very first session. And the first session is more about just getting you some experience with psychedelics. I've never ever done psychedelics, so I have no clue about them. Yeah, it's the clinic, really nice setting. You put in the dosage for that session, and for 15 minutes, you're swishing it around, and you don't want to swallow it because will upset your stomach. But during that time, you're doing a guided meditation with the therapist. And for me, usually I never made it to the end of that guided meditation. It was like eventually within that 15 minutes, it's okay. The tongue is starting to tingle a little bit, and you'd look up at the lights and go, okay, the shadows will actually have color to them, right?
Right.
And then you realize, yeah, you start going. And then at the end of the 15 minutes, you spit out what's left. They pull an eye mask down. They put the headphones on with some really amazing music. They put the chair back and away you go.
Hmm.
And for me, the very first, like I never saw images. I only saw colors and patterns. And it was really good. The very first one was really good because being the first responder, where we need to be in control, 'cause we're all control freaks.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, it's like this thing is taking over, and it's like trying to fight it. It's like trying to fight an anesthetic. I tried to fight it, and it's okay. I can't fight it. Well, I'm going to at least try to see if I can control the colors. And I couldn't. And I got to the point where it's okay, I'm just going to surrender to it. Whatever happens, happens. But that was really good. That was my first. I've learned this after that session because you really reflect on it. But for me, just surrendering to it was actually letting, right? We hear all these, I understand the concept in therapy and just in everyday life that sometimes you just need to let go of things. I get the concept,
Right.
absolutely, but it's a concept. For me, surrendering to the experience was letting go of that control. And so after that session, yeah, I can actually know what it really feels like now to let go. So that helped me.
Wow.
And then said my wife was driving us home downtown Toronto, and it's not like you switch it off. It takes time to wear off as well. And I remember we're driving downtown Toronto, and I'm at rush hour time, and I'm looking at all the people walking around, and I'm looking at the big buildings, and they looked a little. My perspective was different. Instead of there's a person, and there's a person, and there's a car, and there's a big building, like puzzle pieces, I was looking at the completed puzzle. So for me, that was like, I got to experience connection.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So I'll explain how that plays out a little bit later in my journey. And like I said, different sessions, the following sessions, I had things like, for me, when I was coming out of the nice colors and all that would start to fade to just blacks and grays. And I remember coming out of one session, I didn't want it to end. It was sad that it was ending. But I started bawling my eyes out, like almost enough to hold a bucket to catch it all. When I came out of it and I was reflecting on it, and I realized that sadness that I was presented with, I'm going to say it like that I was presented with coming out of the trip was actually a lot of the sadness from all the bad calls I've had over the years coming out. It's the reason why I was bawling my eyes out. So that happened in one session. And just, yeah, it's really incredible. I noticed a difference like first couple days after the first session.
Wow.
So
So how does that have a long-term effect on it? How does that work where it actually makes change versus just an acute feeling?
So what ketamine does, first of all, it's a dissociative anesthetic is what it is. It's used daily in hospitals. So basically what it allows or what it does is it allows your consciousness to separate from your subconscious.
Hmm.
In other words, all those things that make up your consciousness, like core values and egos and things like that, sort of gets pushed aside, and it's just you and your subconsciousness. And like I said, we know how powerful the mind is and the subconscious. So it basically, in simple terms, it allows you to set aside your ego and your experiences and let your subconscious do what it does. And I always equated it to, I was having a conversation with my subconscious, but in my subconscious's language, not in words. But what it also does, when you can get rid of your ego and get rid of your consciousness, it allows some of that stuff, the crud, I call it, that's stuck up here. It's stuck up there because of ego and things like that. There's no ego in play at the moment. You can get that crud. You can let go of that crud. The way I describe it, and this is the hard part because psychedelics, put it this way, I learned a new word during therapy called ineffable, which means unable to be put into words, which is how I sort of describe it.
A word
So,
that describes how to not put into words. Yeah. Great.
yeah, that's pretty funny, actually. So I have to describe it with analogies, right? So my analogy is picture a pail full of marbles, full of round glass balls, pail full of them. And then you throw in sticky tar and gum, chewed gum and all that, and just mix it all in. And so that tar and that gum, that sticky crud stops those marbles from being able to move around the way they would. It's almost like ketamine cleans out that crud.
Oh.
So just a pail of marbles that can move and do what they want. So that's the only way I can describe it. And that's the way it actually feels like, yeah, my mind feels much cleaner and clearer. But what it also does is ketamine apparently also encourages growth of new neural connections, right? So one of the challenges with PTSD is the neural connections between the amygdala and the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. They become less effective and less, right? And hopefully your listeners know that like the amygdala is that part of your brain that makes you go in fight or flight. The hippocampus is that part of your brain that turns like short-term memories into like long-term memories. And hey, we know Memory issues are a hallmark symptom of PTSD. And your prefrontal cortex, that's the part of the brain that says to the amygdala, hey, no, settle down. It's not a real emergency.
Mm.
So if those three aren't really talking, it's problematic. But ketamine apparently helps grow new neural connections and new neural pathways that supposedly helps. Psychedelic therapy for mental health challenges is really, it's like relatively new. And I'm going to say it's on the cutting edge of mental health therapy. Right? So there's some research, right? Not as much research as gone into medications or therapies like cognitive processing therapy, right? But it's very promising.
How do people access this kind of treatment? That must be not the easiest thing to
Uh,
organize? And
so the clinic that I went to, basically, I put in like an application form. You need a referral from a doctor, right, to get into the program, at least the start of the program. I wasn't too sure how open-minded my own doctor would be. She's fairly open-minded, but doesn't know a lot from the mental health side of things, which makes sense, right? So I used the clinic's third-party doctor, and that also sped things up a bit. So when the doctor basically said, yeah, he's an acceptable candidate for ketamine therapy, that's what started the ball rolling. I had another appointment with a psychologist after that to go do another assessment to make sure that ketamine therapy was indicated for me, as opposed to there's certain conditions, mental health conditions and physical health conditions that eliminate you from being able to use ketamine therapy. Once I got past that, then it was an appointment with the intake person, and we started scheduling sessions, one session every week. And after each session, I had an integration session. So you integrate what you may have learned from the session into your day-to-day life. And I had 4 therapy sessions as well with the therapist that was assigned to me. Right?
fascinating.
And those therapists are all psychedelic informed therapists. The clinic I was going to, it was mandatory that every person who worked there, like from the therapists to the registered nurses, they had to go through a couple sessions of ketamine so that they could experience it themselves to help them understand what the clients would be experiencing.
Mhm. Mhm. Wow,
So
fascinating.
yeah, it's one of the things. So the example I'm going to give, this was after my 4th session. My wife and I went to see ventriloquist comedian. Can't for the life of me. Oh, Jeff Dunham.
Oh, yes. Classic. He's a good one. Yep.
Yeah. It was held in an arena up in Peterborough, Ontario. And so it's okay. I was prepared. Like I had my little go bag that I carry with me. It's got an essential oil, some of those little really hot cinnamon hearts and elastic band and a stone, just things I had used to help me cope, the 5 senses type thing. And I remember sitting there and it's okay. Wow. I remember looking around. It's okay. There's a lot of people starting to file in and it's like, okay. And at that point is because I've become very aware of what's going on in my body. It's okay. Yeah. The heart's starting to beat a little bit more. You could feel it. And so my eyes are like wide open, trying to look as a kid. And I could feel the anxiety building. And then I stopped for a sec and I looked around and I said to myself, you know what? All these people, we're all connected.
Mm.
We're all here for the same reason, to see this guy on the stage. And my anxiety stopped. So I attribute that right back to that very first session when I saw that, you know what, we're all connected. The other thing that happened is my wife and I go to a local pub once a week. We frequent there to give them our business, and it's a nice place to go. And I would always choose the seat. And it would always be a booth where typical first responder with PTSD, my back could be at a wall so I could see as much as possible, hypervigilance. But this one night that we went, it's like, holy crap. I think it was wing night and it was packed. And there's only one table left, and it was small table for two, right in the middle. So it's okay. So we start eating, and I'm talking to my wife, and all of a sudden, halfway through dinner, I stopped. And my wife looks at me, she goes, "What? What?" And I started doing this, and you know what? I haven't turned around, see who's sitting behind me. I hadn't even looked over the wall to the bar section to see what's going on over there. It's wow, the hypervigilance, it's gone. Well, I'm not gonna say gone, but there's still a little tiny bit. But yeah, it was gone. And ever since then, I let my wife pick where she wants to sit, and I'll sit wherever.
Nice.
And again, that I attribute to the ketamine therapy.
Wow. Fascinating.
So
So you've mentioned your wife a few times. How's that now? You said it was pretty
awesome.
rocky. Yeah.
Yeah,
Due to the
yeah,
work we both put in, right?
yeah. Before my diagnosis, well, I was waiting for the diagnosis. During that time, I knew what it was going to be. That's when we knew it was PTSD, and didn't know about the depression side of things, but I knew, okay, it's PTSD. Once we knew that, my wife realized that no, it's our marriage problems weren't hers. The real problem was mine. I was the problem, not our marriage.
Or PTSI was the problem.
Absolutely. And yeah, we realized there's a reason why I was like I was. And like I said, I was a bear to live with for the better part of a decade. Yeah. So once she understood that, oh yeah, it's not Rob, it's the PTSI. And one of the things I chose to do as well is one, I wanted her to get therapy as well, because one of the first books I read talked about usually the partners or the spouses of a first responder battling with PTSD develop vicarious trauma. So yeah, I want to get her into therapy as well, which was paid out of our benefits, not out of the WSIB. And what I did was I wanted to learn absolutely everything I could about PTSD and eventually depression. And every time I learned something, I taught my wife. So, what better way to truly understand something than teaching it to somebody else?
Totally.
So she was very supportive, and we're at the point now where my wife knows when I'm off, even before I do, right? So she said, "You're off," or like, she knows now, and she understands, flashbacks and dissociation and intrusive thoughts. And so that really helped us a lot.
Wouldn't that be beautiful if all partners could, first responders included, but all partners and first responders
Yeah.
have that knowledge before crisis hits?
Yeah. Before,
Mhm.
absolute. After, you know what? The one thing I've noticed over the last 4 years with my own journey and the education I do, there's a lot of stuff out there for the first responder. Like whether it's in Ontario here, boots on the ground, badge of life, wounded warriors. There's lots of programs out there for the first responder. There's a handful of programs out there for the spouse. There's not a lot out there for the kids.
Good point.
One
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah, great point.
You know what? I've thought about it a lot. Like what, and there's guilt that goes along with that you have to deal with. But I want to know. I'd like to know. So my first responder, I want the details. I'll only see as my kids grow older, like they're into their early adults now, like 20, 25, and 28. But you know what? I won't really know what impact my PTSD had on them until later in their lives. Yeah, there needs to be stuff, programs for the kids. I actually did some pro bono work for Can Praxis. It's an equine therapy program out in Alberta for first responders and their families. And they created the first that I know of equine therapy program for families, right? Where one of the parents is a first responder dealing with PTSD or a veteran dealing with PTSD. And one of the things I did for them was I created an age appropriate coloring book that they could use with the kids as a coloring book, but also getting across them some concepts, right? Things like, look, there's one picture of a person going like this with fireworks in the background, and it's coloring, right? And a few little words like sometimes your mom or dad may get scared by fireworks, right? It just things like that. Things like sometimes memories make mom or dad cry, just to help educate the really young kids, right?
Oh, that's very important. I never considered how much of an impact that could have on our children. So my kids
So,
are around the same age,
yeah.
and I'm sure they experienced a lot of my trauma and a lot of my stress without me trying or obviously trying,
So
but yeah.
here's something else I'll tell you. Early on in my journey, I went to visit my daughter. We went out for lunch. Went to a wing place down in St. Catharines, Ontario. And she was asking me, how's therapy going? And this and that. And I'm talking to her. Yeah, therapy's going good. And this was like, she was a little bit, she was 23 at the time. And I'm talking to her and I said, yeah, now that I have an understanding and I look back, I've probably been dealing with PTSD, like active PTSD for the better part of a decade. And her exact words, although it was a unintentional, unintended knife to the heart,
Mm,
but she said, yeah, for almost half my life, I guess I've never really known who my father was. And it's like, oh my God, that hurts. But that really makes you think about what impact there is on the families.
it's powerful.
Yeah, it hurt.
Mhm,
Oh, trust me,
mhm,
that hurt. So I hope she doesn't watch or listen to this podcast because she doesn't know that,
right.
how much that hurt. But
Well, I'm sure she does. Deep
yeah,
down, I'm sure she does.
yeah,
Y
yeah,
You talked about your coloring books and how much of an impact they made. I'd love to dig into your digital art that you've kind of part of your therapy as well as spreading
yeah.
the message.
Let me explain how I what motivates me, what drives me. So it was in February or beginning of April. I'm in weekly therapy at the beginning of my journey, and I'm still at work. So I decided to tell my crew. I said, yeah, you know what? I'm in weekly therapy for what's probably PTSD. And one of the guys on my crew, who is on our department's SISM slash quasi peer support team, his exact words were, and this is, I don't blame him, but his exact words were, oh, yeah, we noticed a difference in you almost 2 years ago, but we just chalked it up to you being a grumpy old guy near the end of your career.
Mm,
And it's holy crap. There's a hell of a lot more education that needs to be delivered. And then the head of our SISM team, he reached out to me when I first went off work and said, yeah, okay, great. Thanks for reaching out. Yeah, well, this and all that. Reached out to me a few months later and asked me if I could reach out to somebody else who was off. And I'm going, I'm off work. I'm struggling. And you want me to do what you should be doing? All right. And then he reached out to me again in October. And I thought, I had an idea why he reached out to me, but I thought, hey, just curious, why are you calling me now? And his exact words were, sorry to have bothered you. You won't hear from me again. And he hung up. And it's holy crap. So that's what motivated me to get into the peer support side of things. So what better way to educate through talks, which I do as well with departments, but through artwork. And what I tell people is, you know what? I was never good with markers or paintbrushes or anything like that, but I know my way around computers. And I'm somewhat creative in a graphical sense, right? So what better way to educate? So I started doing the digital artwork that's all mental health related, to help educate. And also some of them, although on the surface they educate, only I know and a few people know that, oh yeah, that one really helped me process one of my calls. All right. So I made that comment about my first problematic call, that there's some things you can never unhear. I did a great art piece showing a dispatcher standing in front of the consoles, stuff around it. And it's a lot of first responders who don't understand will always say, how could that bother you? You weren't even there. And to that, I say, you know what? There are some things you can never unhear. So, yeah, I used that piece to help me process my call, but also to educate. So, a lot of my artwork would be considered very dark, and I don't have a problem with that. I had an organization that wanted to show one of my art pieces. The person who runs the organization really loved it, but the board of directors was saying, oh, you know what? It's a little dark. Can we make it nicer? And so when I was talking with the person who runs the organization, I said, you're afraid of people getting triggered. Okay, so here's the thing. I can't expect people to tiptoe around my triggers. It's
Right.
my responsibility to be able to deal with it when I do get triggered. And I had another organization I've donated an art piece to the end of April. They'll be getting it just to auction off and raise some money. And it's one of the ones that deals with family,
Mm.
right? So it's got a first responder sitting on a couch, slowly turning into a demon, right? There's family pictures on the back wall, and then there's a son, the wife, a daughter who are crying, and even the dog put in the picture is like scared. And the organization that I'm donating it to, the head lady was saying, it's a little triggering, especially with a picture of a devil's head in the one picture that's above. And I said to her, I said, you know what? It's really simple. Dealing with PTSD, a journey with PTSD can be incredibly dark. Absolutely. It's not pretty. And to sugarcoat it and to try to make it look like full of rainbows and unicorns it does a disservice to those who were struggling and are no longer here. So you know what? My artwork is very raw, but it really deals with a lot of unique aspects of a journey. I'll be honest with you, it's a lot of my stuff is different style though, but a lot of my stuff is like Daniel Sundell's, Dan's son. People haven't seen his artwork, does amazing stuff. And some of his artwork is very dirty, very dark and gritty. All right. Especially dealing with suicide. No, it is what it is. That's the reality of dealing with an occupational stress injury.
Do you do
So
this artwork for yourself, or do you sell it or give it away, or how's that work?
I do it more to educate. Anybody wants to buy them, I'll sell them.
Yeah. Where could they find them?
You can go to my website, Leathen, Leathen.ca, and under the artwork menu, it'll take you to my artwork website.
How many have you done over the years?
Oh, I think I'm up to about 80 now.
Wow, nice.
And yeah, I have done a couple of art pieces on consignment. I did one art piece for a young lady down in near Niagara Falls. She was with the Niagara Parks Police, suffered a very traumatic injury on duty. She will likely never be working again, but she approached me to see if I'd be willing to work with her to do an art piece, and I did. And then when she asked me how much, and I said, nothing. If it's going to help you with your recovery journey, I don't want to make money on that. If
Yeah.
it's going to help you, that's
Yep.
what it's about.
Yep.
And I do that so my personal philosophy is I really don't want to make money on mental health challenges, things like that. So whenever I do graphic artwork for people, like I just did a logo for somebody a week and a half ago. And she wanted to know how much. I said, here's what we're going to do. I'll give you the friends and family discount. I said, you figure out how much that piece of work is, what value it is to you, and then make a donation to a first responder organization in that amount. I even did that with my therapist.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let me restate this. She's no longer my therapist. We had to part ways only because it's a conflict of interest having a working relationship
Right.
between a clinician and a client. So she's no longer my therapist, and we do some stuff together, like with teaching peer support, for example, and just things like that. And so I did an art piece just for her, and then I donated that to her as a thank you. But she asked me if I could do some other little things, and I said, yeah, no problem. And said, okay. She even said, yep, this is what I'm looking for. I'll even pay you. I said, okay, great. Finished them. She absolutely loved the artwork that she wanted me to do. And she said, okay, how much do I owe you? And I said, I'll give you the friends and family discount. Make a donation in the amount you think they're worth to either Badge of Life Canada or Boots on the Ground. And
Very
she
nice.
did. So
Very nice.
again, I'll sell my artwork if people want it. Kind of neat.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't see a lot of people really wanting to buy my artwork. I don't think Dan's son sells as many as he had hoped he would, just because the target audience is very, very narrow.
And it
It's
also
not-
goes back to the stigma too. People
Yeah,
maybe not
yeah.
want to hang that in their house because there's a stigma still out there that
yeah.
that's dark, that's gritty, that's
Yeah.
the devil or whatever. There's
Yeah.
a stigma still there.
So yeah, if people want to buy some of my artwork, great. I'm not doing it to sell it to make money, if that makes to
Yep.
profit.
Yep.
So
Can you share a little plug about your work in the peer support world?
oh, absolutely. Because of my experience with the gentleman from my department hanging up on me, and I realized that is no freaking way to be doing peer support or SISM. So that's what drove me to get into peer support. And I started out attending as a participant with the Wings of Change organization. And that was the start of my intro to peer support. My therapist suggested to me, hey, you should maybe look at Badge of Life. Right. And maybe volunteering for them. So I started out with Badge of Life doing peer support as a participant. It actually helped me in my journey. At the same time, there was an organization in Ontario called Boots on the Ground. It's anonymous peer support for first responders. There's actually a chapter opening up in Alberta right now as well.
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah.
And I thought volunteering there. So here's my thinking with that. To be a good peer supporter, you got to be able to have compassion for the person you're supporting. And my actual thought process at the very beginning was, okay, if I can show compassion for the struggling first responders who call, maybe that'll help me with my own self-compassion, because I had zero. So I got into doing that, trying to think of the order of things. So Wings of Change, I became a facilitator. So I was then facilitating the meetings, trying to think. There's been a lot going on. I eventually stepped away from Wings of Change just because I'm taking on a lot of stuff. And there were some changes going on that were a challenge for me to accept. And then I become a peer supporter with Badge of Life. See, now you understand why I always confuse Badge of Life and Boots to the Ground. They both start with B.
Start with exactly.
Yep.
Yep.
So I became a peer facilitator with Badge of Life. And just before that, I was asked if I would be willing to become an area manager for Boots on the Ground. So that was really good. So I'm really developing that. At all that's going on, one of the people in my social network, we call him the grandfather of peer support in Ontario. when he had his challenges, there really was no peer support at all. And he developed like the framework for Wings of Change. He developed the peer and trauma support systems program under the Mood Disorder Society of Canada. So he reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in heading up the fire-focused version of it. So, yeah, absolutely. So I jumped on that and found a co-facilitator and both who's a firefighter as well. And the PowerPoints have been changed slightly to make it more fire-focused. Like getting rid of all the blue. No disrespect to blue, red.
Right. Yep.
And some stats that are more firefighter related than others. So yeah, my facilitator and I do that now. I also got asked if I'd be willing to become the manager or co-manager of peer support and training for Badge of Life, which I did. I accepted that, and I was doing that since October of last year. But just recently, I realized that everything I was doing, I was driven and I was letting my self-care slip, and I was doing all that to my own detriment. So you may not even know this, but just this week, I've stepped back from that role with Badge of Life to just be the peer supporter.
Right. Yeah.
And,
Good for you. Good for you to identify that, right? That.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's important.
Yeah. We're helpers, first responders, but
And number one.
we got to practice what we preach.
Good for you.
So it's like, and I'll be honest with you, it was just being able to release all the stuff around that role. Just, it lightened the load on my shoulders. It was freeing. You know what? It's something I really was grateful for, but I got to look after myself.
Good for you. Good for you.
Yeah.
In our closing minutes, what would be a golden nugget that you'd love to share with your listeners that you think is super important to get out there and be heard?
I've got a couple. How much time do we have? One, no matter how bad you think it is, it always gets better.
Mm.
So if you can remember that, if you ever find yourself in that dark place, and I'm going to use the words, if you ever find yourself considering suicide, please remember, I'm not going to give you all this, the stand line, but you're not alone, blah, blah. What I want to get across is it always gets better. May not get better as quick as you want, and may not be instantaneous, but it does get better.
Mm.
And the other one, I always tell people that I don't look at my PTSD, depression, and my suicide attempt as a curse. I look at my PTSD as a gift. And that's hard for people to really wrap their heads around, but I see it as a gift to me because it forced me to do a lot of inner reflection that wasn't fun to do, and basically recreate and reinvent myself better than I was before. And that happened because of a realization that I had, all the reading I did, and my therapist, my original therapist, said that my library of books is better than hers.
Right. Yeah.
Some of the books I have are like clinician books. It's I learned as much as I could.
Mhm.
But a lot of the things, the common thing that I read from a lot of the experts with lots of letters after their names, the alphabet after their names, said that "You know what? Trauma changes you permanently."
Mm.
So I thought to myself, okay, if trauma changes you permanently, I can't go back. I can't.
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
And if I can't go back, there's only two choices: stay where I am and continue to suffer, or say, screw it. I'm going to do what I need to move forward.
Yeah.
And I try to get that across to first responders because I've hear it so many times. I just want to be back to where I was before. I just want to be normal again. I want my life back.
Mm.
You
Mhm.
got to go forward.
Yep.
So because I made that choice to go forward, at the point now in my journey where My wife calls it Rob 3.0, not Rob 1.0.
Right.
My marriage is even stronger. I actually like myself now.
Love yourself.
Yeah, that's a better way of saying it. Yes, I actually love myself now. And you know what? I'm doing good things with my life,
You are. You
helping
are.
others.
Yeah. Rob, I know you on a personal level as a volunteer with the Boots of Life as well. And I just want to thank you for.
See, you did it too. Boots of life. You mean badge of life?
Oh, what did I say? Boots on the ground?
You said boots of life. See?
Awesome. Yes. All right. Rewind. That's the blooper reel right there.
Yeah.
But honestly, I know you as a person outside of this, and I can't thank you enough for being so vulnerable and open about your story, your process, what you went through. It honestly will change. It's changing lives right now, let alone it will change lives. It's changing lives already.
My sort of tagline, I guess, and it's changed over time, was originally silence does nothing but strengthen stigma. Now my full tagline is silence does nothing but strengthen stigma. And when we recover loudly, we keep others from dying quietly. Speak up, speak out, and speak loud when it comes to first responder mental health.
What a way to close the session. Wow. Rob, once again, thank you so much. Really appreciate your message and your story. And I'm so glad that you're here today.
So am I.
You're with us and that you're in a good place in your life, helping others and helping yourself as well and loving yourself. So
Yeah.
Thanks again, Rob. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. We'll talk to you later.
Stay well, everyone.
Thank you for tuning in to Beneath the Helmet. We hope that this podcast has provided you with valuable insights into the world of firefighters' health and wellness. Remember, caring for your physical, mental, and spiritual well-being is crucial to achieving optimal performance. Join us next time on Beneath the Helmet for more inspiring conversations. Until then, stay well.